He called her my replacement, but my dad's CEO papers said otherwise. This is Madison, your replacement. That's what Ethan told me. Cool as ice, at what was supposed to be our anniversary dinner. His hand rested casually on her shoulder, the other swirling a glass of champagne like he hadn't just detonated a bomb in my chest. I stood there, frozen. The ambient chatter of the restaurant suddenly drowned in silence. Madison didn't even flinch. She just smiled, polished, smug, like she already knew. I was nothing more than a ghost of his past. 2 days later, I found the CEO succession documents, tucked deep inside one of my late father's old leather briefcases. The ink was fresh. The company seal? Stamped clean and proud. There was only one name on them. Mine. Not Ethan's, not Madison's. Just mine. And suddenly, everything started making sense. The late nights, the boardroom whispers, the way Ethan kept steering me away from business talks lately, like I didn't need to worry my little head about it. The restaurant was Marlowe's on 5th, the same candlelit bistro where Ethan had proposed to me 7 years ago. Back then, we were young, hopeful, ambitious. Tonight, it felt like a stage set for betrayal. I'd spent 3 hours getting ready, trying to revive whatever spark we'd lost between quarterly reports and strained silences. My navy silk dress still had the tag in my purse, too pricey for a normal night, but justified for what I believed was a special one. But Ethan was already seated when I arrived, and he wasn't alone. She sat in what should have been my chair. Late 30s, maybe, icy blonde hair pulled into a perfect bun, the kind that probably cost more than my monthly haircuts combined. That red sheath dress, haute couture, tight enough to turn heads, expensive enough to demand respect. Her lipstick and nails, perfectly matched, a glossy crimson that screamed confidence or war. She looked like she belonged there, like she'd already replaced me in every way that mattered. And Ethan, he didn't even look guilty, just done. I knew her type the second I saw her. We used to hire carbon copies of women like that at Halcyon Dynamics, polished, ambitious, perfectly packaged for corporate warfare. I stood frozen near the host stand, watching them laugh at something on her phone. Ethan leaned in close, his hand brushing hers as he squinted at the screen, like they were some teenage couple on a first date. The host cleared his throat behind me, snapping me out of the daze. "Mrs. Caldwell, would you like to be seated?" Ethan looked up. His eyes met mine. No shame, no panic, just that same boardroom smile he used to charm investors, polished, hollow, utterly calculated. "Caroline, there you are. Perfect timing." I walked toward them, slow and steady, every step a battle against the tremor building in my legs. The woman didn't even shift, didn't offer to move. She just sat there, in my chair. Instead, Ethan grabbed an extra seat from the next table, slid it beside theirs, slightly behind, like I was an afterthought. "Sorry for the curveball," he said smoothly, voice dipped in faux warmth. I wanted tonight to feel memorable. I stayed standing, eyes darting between them. Memorable for what, exactly? He smiled wider, smug, rehearsed, then swept his hand toward her, like he was presenting a new product line. "Meet Natalie Singh, your replacement." The restaurant noise around me vanished, muffled, like someone shoved cotton in my ears. I could feel the blood pounding at my temples. My what? Ethan let out a brittle little laugh, forced, theatrical. "Relax, at Halcyon, obviously. The board confirmed it this morning. Natalie's the new chief strategy officer." My job, the position I'd poured years into, built from the ground up, and he'd just handed it off like it was a favor to a friend. I had built that role from the ground up, 11 years of blood, sweat, and boardrooms. I was there when Halcyon Dynamics was nothing but my father's pipe dream, a fledgling tech startup, running on hope and secondhand servers in our garage. And now, here I was, staring down the woman who was replacing me, like I was some outdated feature in a software update. Natalie extended her hand, graceful, polished, perfectly composed. And on her wrist, my father's vintage Rolex, the very one he gifted me the day we signed our first $1 million client. "It's an honor to finally meet you, Caroline," she said smoothly. "Ethan's told me so much about your early contributions to the company." Early contributions? As if I were already a framed photograph on the company's history wall. Past tense, archived, forgotten. "I'm sorry," I replied, my hand still at my side. "There must be some mistake. I'm still the COO at Halcyon." Ethan didn't even blink. "My father's stepping back from daily operations," he cut in, tone calm, too calm. "You know how his health has been. Doctor's orders, less stress." My father had a mild heart attack 6 months ago. He was back at work in under 3 weeks. Against doctor's advice, sure, but there was never any mention, none, of restructuring, especially not this. My voice barely sounded like my own. Hollow, like it was echoing through a tunnel. He didn't say anything to me. Ethan's smile twitched at the corners, just enough to let me know he was done pretending this was a kind gesture. "We thought it would be easier coming from me, more celebratory." He gestured to the bottle of champagne, chilling in the silver bucket beside the table, like this betrayal was something to toast. After all, now you can finally focus on what really matters. I stared at him. And what would that be? "Family," he said, like it was the most obvious thing in the world. "That house in Westwood we've been looking at. A couple kids. You're 35, Caroline. The clock's ticking." I blinked. We hadn't talked seriously about children in over 2 years. Not since I found him in bed with his assistant. Not since the therapy sessions, where he swore he'd change, that he respected my career, that he wanted to rebuild what we'd broken. And just like that, something inside me gave way. Not with a crash, but with the soft, sharp snap of ice under too much weight. I pulled out the third chair, the one he'd dragged over, like I was some spare part, and sat down. Then, without a word, I reached for the champagne and poured myself a full glass before either of them could stop me. I poured myself a full glass. Not the polite little pour Ethan preferred at networking dinners. No, this was a bold, defiant pour, a line in the sand. "So," I said, lifting the glass with a steadiness that shocked even me, "to my replacement. May she find my chair as warm as I left it." For just a second, Natalie's perfect facade cracked. She looked at Ethan, searching his face for a cue. He cleared his throat, already shifting back into business mode. "Caroline, maybe we should look at the menu first. Talk through the transition plan. The board's been extremely generous with your exit package." Exit package. They'd already signed the papers. My husband and the board. And I hadn't even received the courtesy of a damn email. I set the glass down, untouched. "Does my father know you're wearing his watch, Natalie?" Her hand instinctively covered the Rolex, like she could somehow take back the offense. Ethan stepped in fast, like he'd been waiting for this moment. It's company tradition for the CSO role. "Did he mention it was a gift?" I asked, voice flat. A gift to me after I landed the Westlake account, the account that pulled Halcyon out of the red and put us on the map. Ethan's jaw tightened. Caroline, don't make this harder than it needs to be. The decision's final. The board vote was unanimous. I stared at him. Including my father's vote? His eyes flickered, just for a moment. He abstained, for obvious reasons. Of course he did. I stood slowly, smoothing the creases in my silk dress, every movement deliberate. I need the restroom, I said, not waiting for either of them to respond. Inside the marble-lined bathroom, I didn't cry, I didn't scream, I didn't fall apart. I pulled out my phone and dialed my father's private number, the one only family knew. Voicemail. I called his assistant. "Olivia, it's Alina. Is my father still in the office?" "He left early, Miss Caldwell," she replied. "Said he needed to sort through some old files at home. Asked not to be disturbed." Old files? My father never touched old files. He archived everything, digitally, perfectly labeled. "Thanks, Olivia," I said quietly, then ended the call. I stared at myself in the bathroom mirror, really stared. Steel gray eyes, his eyes, the same unshakable jawline that had defined every company portrait since Halcyon was born. My mother's high cheekbones, a faint scar above my right brow, earned the night I collapsed at my desk during our first major product launch. This face had helped build a 500 million empire from dust. And Ethan thought he could discard it for something shinier, younger? He really had no idea what he was playing with. I walked back to the table, calm, like a storm about to break. I picked up my purse, met Natalie's eyes head-on. "The Westlake contract comes up for renewal next quarter," I said evenly. "They won't re-sign without me. Neither will Axiom or Blue Summit. Their CEOs call my personal number, not the company line." I turned to Ethan. "And that shiny little innovation pipeline you brag about to shareholders? It lives on my private server, password protected, encrypted. The Newton acquisition strategy?" I tapped my temple. "Stored right here, not a single word of it on paper." Ethan's face twisted, the charm draining fast. "Elena, don't be childish. This is business." "No," I said, my voice like glass. "This was family. Now, it's just business." I left them sitting there, champagne sweating in the ice bucket, their perfect betrayal losing its shine by the second. The host gave me a look, soft, knowing, as I passed. I didn't return it. In my car, I didn't start the engine right away. Instead, I pulled out my phone and typed, "Coming over, need to talk, about Halcyon and Ethan." I hit send to the only number that mattered. His reply came within seconds. "Back doors unlocked. Use the spare key inside the garden gnome. Bring the blue briefcase from my desk. Don't tell anyone you're coming." I didn't go straight to my father's. I went home first. Our penthouse, the one Ethan and I bought after Halcyon went public. The place was still and hollow, save for our housekeeper, who looked genuinely startled to see me walk in so early. My father's home office had always taken up the smallest guest room in our apartment. Ethan hated it, called it a waste of space. But to my father, that cramped little room was command central. I unlocked the door and went straight to the antique mahogany desk. Bottom drawer. There it was, the blue briefcase. Heavy. Locked. The combination? My mother's birthday. It always was. Inside, beneath carefully stacked legal papers and yellowed family photos, I found what I didn't even know I was looking for. The CEO succession plan, drafted by the original board, signed by my father, dated just last month. In the event of Elena Caldwell's resignation or incapacity to serve, all executive control of Halcyon Dynamics shall transfer directly to her as Chief Executive Officer and primary shareholder. Primary shareholder? The words thudded on the page like a second heartbeat. I flipped through the attached stock documents. 51% transferred to a trust in my name. Ethan's name? Buried pages below. 8%. The standard executive allotment. Nothing more. I closed the briefcase. Not in anger, not even pain. Just clarity. The kind that settles in like the eye of a storm. I pulled out my phone and dialed Wilson Blake, head of the board and my father's oldest confidant. Wilson, it's Elena Caldwell. Cancel tomorrow's board meeting. We're rescheduling. A pause, with me presiding. When I hung up, I stood for a moment in the apartment Ethan and I had called home for 5 years, and for the first time, it didn't feel like mine. It felt like a stage we'd already torn down, the curtains drawn, the lights off. The modern furniture Ethan had insisted on, the sterile lines, the showroom-perfect decor, none of it held any warmth. The cold, impersonal art that dotted the walls like status symbols, it meant absolutely nothing to me. I wouldn't be sleeping there tonight. I had a company to take back. Not a single hour of sleep touched me that night. Every moment was spent strategizing, assembling pieces, bracing for battle. And if you've been with me through this story, thank you. If you're enjoying it, a quick subscribe helps more than you know. Now, back to it. I drove out to my father's house in the foothills beyond the city. Same modest ranch-style place I'd grown up in. The same garage where we'd built Halcyon's first prototype from salvaged parts and boundless belief. Ethan used to call it charmingly outdated, always with that smirk that made you wonder if he even knew how condescending he sounded. The garden gnome by the side door still hid the spare key. It had been there since I was 10. Some things never changed, and in that moment, I found myself deeply grateful for that consistency. The blue briefcase felt heavier than it had before as I carried it through the door. The house was quiet, except for the soft, steady hum of my father's oxygen machine upstairs. He needed it at night, ever since the heart attack. But he'd never admit that to the board, or to Ethan. Another secret we kept. I found him in his study, still in his work shirt and slacks, tie loosened but not removed. His silver hair was mussed, like he'd been dragging his fingers through it while pacing. The garden gnome by the side door still hid the spare key. It had been there since I was 10. Some things never changed, and in that moment, I found myself deeply grateful for that consistency. The blue briefcase felt heavier than it had before as I carried it through the door. The house was quiet, except for the soft, steady hum of my father's oxygen machine upstairs. He needed it at night, ever since the heart attack. But he'd never admit that to the board, or to Ethan. Another secret we kept. I found him in his study, still in his work shirt and slacks, tie loosened but not removed. His silver hair was mussed, like he'd been dragging his fingers through it while pacing. The walls were lined with family photos, not museum-grade prints or minimalist abstracts. Real memories. Me in cap and gown, Mom glowing in a photo from before the cancer. All three of us smiling in front of Halcyon's very first office, before it had walls, before it had staff, before it had money. No designer chairs, no statement lighting, just history, framed and preserved. Dad looked up when I walked in, his eyes tired but focused. He saw the briefcase in my hand and gave a single knowing nod. You found it. Why didn't you tell me? I asked. My voice was steady, clear. I wasn't asking from a place of emotion anymore. I was past that. This was business, but it was also personal. Now, I said, my voice low but steady, tell me about Ryan, about Vanessa, about the board meeting. Dad gestured to the chair across from him. Sit down, Ellie. No one called me that anymore. No one except him. And somehow, that name, spoken softly in this dimly lit study, anchored me. I needed to be sure, he said, reaching for a glass of water on his desk. About Ryan, about what he was really planning. So you knew? The betrayal sliced deeper than I expected. You knew, and you still let me walk into that dinner blind? He shook his head slowly. I suspected, ever since he started having closed-door meetings with Wilson and the others, always after hours, always when you were away on business. He paused, taking a slow breath through his oxygen tube. I couldn't bring it to you without proof, not until I had something real. And what exactly did you find? He opened the bottom drawer of his desk and pulled out a worn manila folder. He slid it across the wood toward me. Inside, an avalanche of betrayal. Email printouts, financial statements, meeting minutes I'd never seen. 3 months ago, Dad said, Ryan approached the board with a restructuring proposal, one that positioned Halcyon for acquisition. By who? But I already knew the answer before he said it. Vortex Industries. My stomach turned. Vortex, the same soulless corporate giant that had been trying to dismantle us from day one. They can't do that, I snapped, tapping the briefcase beside me. Not without approval from the majority shareholder, which, it turns out, is me. Dad nodded grimly. Ryan told the board you were stepping back, that you wanted to start a family, that you were ready to hand over control. I saw a flash of something in his eyes then, a flicker of familiar rage. He forged your signature on the early agreements, Dad said, jaw clenched. I only caught it because Olivia noticed the loop on your L was wrong. Olivia, Dad's assistant for over 20 years, the same woman who brought me soup during college finals, who helped me pick out my wedding dress. Another person Ryan had underestimated. I flipped through the documents, each one more damning than the last. It wasn't carelessness. It wasn't luck. Ryan had been engineering this for nearly a year. The conveniently timed international trips that kept me out of the country, the executives hired behind my back, the accounts quietly shifted to unfamiliar banks. Why her? I asked, but deep down, I already knew. Dad sighed. Vanessa's Vortex's inside player. Planted. She's young enough to seem like innovation, old enough to pass for credibility, and she's been with them for 8 years. 8 years. The same number of years Ryan and I had been together. I forced myself to meet Dad's eyes. Did you know about them? About Ryan and her? Something in his expression softened. No, Ellie, he said. Not that part. I didn't find that out until tonight. That betrayal was a surprise, even to me. I stood up and began pacing the room. The same small study where I'd once done algebra homework while Dad drafted the original Halcyon logo, where I'd rehearsed my first pitch to investors, where I'd cried after Mom died and promised I'd take care of him, take care of the company. He wants me gone, I said, the words heavy, not just demoted, erased. Dad didn't try to soften it. He never did. That's what made him a survivor, what made Halcyon last while other startups crashed and burned. Yes, he said bluntly. And if the acquisition goes through, it triggers a buyout clause. Your stock options get dissolved. You'll get a payout, sure, but pennies on the dollar compared to what they're worth. I turned to him. And what about you? He gave a thin smile, bitter and resigned. Ceremonial chairman emeritus, he said. No vote, no power. A pretty office to sit in until I die. The fury that had been simmering since the restaurant ignited again. White hot, righteous, crystal clear. When's the vote? Tomorrow morning, 9 a.m. Before or after the COO transition announcement? After. They need you officially removed first. Otherwise, the acquisition is invalid. I nodded slowly, mind already turning through scenarios, backup plans, risk calculations. I wasn't just thinking about how to stop them anymore. I was thinking about how to win. Does Ryan know? I asked, lifting the briefcase. The one holding the succession documents that could unravel everything he'd built his betrayal on. Dad's eyes flickered with that old, familiar light, the same one that used to shine when he was on the verge of a game-changing move. "No," he said quietly. "Your mother insisted we write that clause in when we founded the company." "Always have a back door," she said. "It's buried in the original incorporation docs, hidden, legal, approved by the board years ago. Most of them don't even remember it exists." I sank back into the chair, the weight of the evening finally settling into my bones. The adrenaline that had carried me this far gave way to exhaustion. My hands trembled slightly as I opened the briefcase and carefully spread the succession documents across his desk. "Why didn't you use this earlier?" I asked, "when you first suspected what he was doing?" He reached across the desk, his hand, warm, steady. The same hands that taught me how to solder my first circuit board when I was 12. "Because Halcyon doesn't belong to me anymore, Ava. It's yours. It's been yours for a long time, even when the paperwork said otherwise. This fight? It's not mine. It's yours." My throat tightened. "I don't know if I can do this." He raised an eyebrow, not unkindly. The same woman who closed the Westgrove deal in a collapsing economy can't handle one cheating husband and a room full of overconfident men? I let out a sharp laugh, dry and involuntary. One single burst in the quiet room. We stayed up all night. No sleep, no second-guessing. Reviewing documents, making quiet calls to trusted allies, both inside the company and out. I changed the access codes on my private server. Dad got the lawyers on standby. By 4 a.m., we had a battle plan. I watched the sunrise from the back porch of the house I'd grown up in. The mountains stood silhouetted against a sky shifting from black to violet to a violent, burning orange. I was still in the silk dress I'd worn to what was supposed to be my anniversary dinner. It was wrinkled now, tired from hours of war room scheming. The diamond ring on my finger felt like lead, heavy, hollow. I twisted it off and held it up to the light. What once represented a future now looked sterile, cold, clinical, just another asset to be liquidated. My phone buzzed. "Ryan, where are you? Came home and you weren't there. We need to talk about your behavior at dinner. This isn't helping your case with the board." My case? As if I was the one on trial. As if betrayal required justification? I didn't respond. Instead, I took a photo of the ring, resting on the porch railing, the mountains rising behind it like silent witnesses, and sent it to him. No words, no context, just the truth, captured in one cold, deliberate image. His response came seconds later. "Don't be dramatic. This is business, not personal. You're being emotional." The ultimate gaslight from a man who orchestrated my professional assassination over filet mignon and champagne. Business, not personal. Right, because plotting behind my back with my competitor and blindsiding me at our anniversary dinner was just another deal. I left the ring exactly where it was. Then I turned around and went inside. I showered, changed into the spare clothes Dad had stashed in the back of my old closet. Simple black pants, crisp white button-down, and the silver earrings I'd worn to my mother's funeral. Quiet armor from another kind of grief. When I came downstairs, Dad was ready, dressed in his best suit, The charcoal one he saved for big investor days. The oxygen tube was gone, but I saw the outline of his heart meds tucked discreetly into his inner pocket. He thought I wouldn't notice. "You don't have to come," I said quietly, though I couldn't imagine facing the day without him. "Your doctor said—" "My doctor," he cut in, straightening his tie, "can bill me extra." His hands looked older than I remembered, more lined, more worn, but steady like always. I didn't build Halcyon for it to be gutted by some glassy-smiled corporate shark, he said, voice firm, with my daughter's husband pulling the strings like some spineless puppet. I stepped forward and hugged him, breathing in the scent of his aftershave, same brand he'd worn since I was a little girl. For a second, I was that girl again, sitting cross-legged in his home office, trying to make sense of spreadsheets, convinced I could help if he just explained what all the numbers meant. I checked my watch. 7:30 a.m. 90 minutes until the boardroom showdown. 90 minutes to save the company my father and I had spent 20 years building, from the garage up. I took a breath, straightened my shoulders, and reached for the door handle. Time to get to work. Inside, Halcyon's lobby pulsed with its usual morning rhythm. Employees bustling past, security nodding if I passed, faces familiar but unreadable. Janice at reception greeted me with her usual bright tone. "Good morning, Miss Caldwell," she said, as if today were like any other, as if my husband weren't planning to erase me from the company I helped build. I returned her smile, the same one I'd mastered through 1,000 tense client meetings. Never let them see you sweat. My mother's advice, whispered behind the podium before my very first investor pitch at 19. "Is the board gathered yet?" I asked, voice calm. Janice glanced at her screen. "Most are in the executive lounge. Mr. Lawson ordered breakfast catering." She hesitated, lowering her voice. "He also asked me to direct you to Conference Room B when you arrived." Conference Room B, a glorified supply closet in the back hallway, usually reserved for vendor audits and intern training sessions. The message was clear. He might as well have posted a sign that read, "Stay out." "Thank you, Janice," I said smoothly, smile intact. "Please let Mr. Lawson know I'll be in my office until the board meeting." "Of course." She bit her lip. "Miss Caldwell, is everything all right? There've been rumors." Of course there had. Every company has an official communication stream, but Halcyon had always run just as efficiently on the unofficial one. I leaned in slightly, voice conspiratorial. "Change is always unsettling, Janice, but I wouldn't worry too much. Some changes," I smiled, "aren't as permanent as they seem." I turned and made my way to the executive elevator. My badge still worked, thank God. As the doors slid shut, I caught a glimpse of my father stepping in through the side entrance, briefcase in hand, nodding at the same security team he'd personally hired over a decade ago. At the top floor, I walked the familiar hall to my office, the one with floor-to-ceiling views of both the city skyline and the mountains beyond. I'd designed the layout myself, every wall of glass, a symbol of the transparency I'd built into Halcyon's culture from day one. I'd expected the door to be locked, expected my access to be revoked, but it wasn't. The door stood slightly ajar, light spilled out from within. I paused, listening. Voices, low, familiar. Ryan's familiar low tenor drifted out first, followed by a woman's voice, Natalie, calm, assured. "The transition should go smoothly," she said. "We just need to manage the optics." "She won't make a scene," Ryan replied, oozing confidence. "Ava's always cared too much about appearances. She always has." I stepped into the doorway, making no effort to hide my presence. "You might want to rethink that assumption." They both turned, startled. Ryan recovered first, straightening up from where he'd been leaning against my desk, quickly removing his hand from Natalie's arm. "Ava," he said, his voice slipping into that overly calm tone he always used during our fights at home. "We were just discussing the transition. I thought you'd be here earlier." Clearly, I walked fully into the room, scanning the space and the damage. My personal items had already been boxed up and placed by the door. The photos on the walls? Gone. Natalie's monogrammed notebooks were stacked neatly where mine used to be. My custom ergonomic chair had been replaced with some slick, sterile white leather thing I'd never seen before. They'd been thorough. I'd give them that. Natalie adjusted her skirt. New outfit from last night, just as perfectly curated. "I can give you two a moment," she offered politely. "No need." I set my purse on the visitor's chair, one of the only pieces of furniture that still belonged to me. "This is still my office. For the next," I checked my watch, 75 minutes, and I have work to do before the board meeting. Ryan's expression hardened. "Ava, be reasonable. We agreed to meet in conference room B to—" "I didn't agree to anything," I cut him off, stepping behind the desk and forcing Natalie to move aside. "And I'll be attending the board meeting in the main boardroom, as usual." "That's not the plan," Natalie interjected, a trace of panic breaking through her polished tone. I smiled, the same smile I used when competitors underestimated our tech during trade shows, right before we buried them. Plans change. Ryan's hand gripped the edge of the desk, his knuckles whitening. "You're making this more difficult than it needs to be." "Am I?" I replied, booting up the computer. My credentials still worked. Another oversight. "Difficult is relative," I continued. "For example, I find it difficult to understand why my husband would partner with a direct competitor to steal my company." Natalie let out a sharp breath, startled. Ryan's face remained still, but I saw it, that subtle twitch near his right eye, his tell, the one he always gave away when he was lying. "I don't know what you think you know," he began, voice low and deliberate, "but this restructuring is board approved and entirely above board." "Like your relationship with Natalie?" I said, raising an eyebrow. I arched a brow, fingers flying across the keyboard, pulling up the files they clearly never expected me to see again. "So," I said, without looking up, "how long has this been going on? Since that tech conference in Seattle last year? Or did it start even earlier?" Natalie shifted uncomfortably, taking a hesitant step toward the door. "I should give you two some privacy." "Sit down," I said, voice calm but commanding. "Since you're so eager to slide into my seat, you should probably understand what the role really includes." I looked up from the monitor. "Did Ryan happen to mention the non-compete clause in your contract? The one that bars you from working for a direct competitor for 3 years after termination? The one with penalties equal to 5 times your annual salary?" Color drained from her face, her foundation suddenly not doing enough to hide the panic underneath. "That's not standard," she whispered. "It is at Titanus," I cut in, emphasizing the company name like a verdict. "For executive-level roles. It's right there, Section 12, Paragraph 4. The clause Ryan conveniently forgot to delete when HR drafted your contract." I turned my gaze back to Ryan, whose calm exterior was starting to fray. His jaw clenched, eyes darting to the screen as I opened another file. "And while we're being transparent," I continued, voice growing colder, "did you inform the board about your little Virion connection? About how Natalie here has been working with them for the last 8 years? About how this restructure is actually the first step in a hostile takeover? Ryan stepped forward, his voice dropping to a hiss. How do you know about... Oh, I know everything. I swung the monitor toward them, displaying an email chain from 6 months ago between Ryan and Virion's CEO. Subject lines like acquisition pathway, board vote incentives, dozens of threads, secret meetings, side deals, payoffs. This is confidential, Ryan snapped, his voice almost breaking. This is evidence, I corrected, of corporate espionage, breach of fiduciary duty, and straight-up fraud. Would you like me to go on? Natalie moved with more urgency toward the door this time. I need to call Carlton Harris. Don't bother, I said with a sweet smile. He already got a cease and desist from our legal team this morning, along with copies of all these emails. She froze, hand clutching the doorknob like it might anchor her to reality. You're bluffing. I leaned back into the unfamiliar white leather chair they'd installed to erase me. Feel free to test that theory, I said with a smirk. The FBI tends to take a keen interest in corporate espionage these days, especially when it involves documented collusion and falsified signatures. Ryan lurched forward, wedging himself between us, desperation bleeding into his voice. Lena, can we talk? Just us? There's more to this deal than you realize. It has benefits for everyone, including you. I stood slowly, gathering the documents I'd printed with calm precision. You mean like introducing your mistress as my replacement at our anniversary dinner? I shot back, eyes locked on his. Yeah, that part was super beneficial. He reached for my arm, but I took a step back. Look, the board already voted, he said, tone strained. The transition is official. Don't humiliate yourself trying to fight it. I glanced at my watch. Speaking of the board, I said coolly, we should probably get going. The meeting starts in 30 minutes. In conference room A, he added quickly. I closed my laptop, tucking it under my arm. No, in the main boardroom, where I've already had IT set up the projector for the evidence. I let that sink in. Evidence I think everyone will find enlightening. For the first time, I saw it. Real fear. A crack in his carefully controlled facade. The same look he'd worn 3 years ago when the Johnson deal was seconds from collapse, before I swooped in and salvaged it with a Hail Mary pitch. Only this time, no one was saving him. He followed me toward the door, voice tightening. Whatever you're doing, it won't work. The decision's already been made. I paused in the doorway, turning to glance one last time at the stripped-down office, the space I'd spent years shaping, now packed into cardboard boxes. Then I looked at the woman standing in my shadow, the one who thought she could replace me. You know what your biggest mistake was, Ryan? I said softly. You forgot who built Titanus in the first place, and it sure as hell wasn't you. I left them standing there, him clenching his jaw, her still gripping the door, and I headed not toward the boardroom, but toward the small office down the hall, the one my father had quietly occupied since stepping back from daily operations. The war wasn't over, but now it was finally my turn to fight. He was already there, waiting, silver hair slicked back with precision, the oxygen tank noticeably absent, a quiet defiance in that small detail alone. On his desk lay a spread of crisp documents, not digital printouts, but originals, every signature, every seal, intact. Beside them, a slim tablet streamed a live feed from the executive lounge, where board members sipped coffee, exchanged hollow pleasantries, oblivious to the storm about to roll through. "Right on time," he murmured, tapping the screen. "Blake, sweating bullets, keeps checking the clock." Wilson Blake, chairman of the board, Ryan's right-hand man in this mutiny, a man who used to lift me onto his shoulders at summer picnics, back when loyalty meant something. "Do they suspect anything?" I asked, placing my laptop and briefcase on the side table. "Not yet," he replied, tapping again. "Though Harris from Vortex called Blake twice in the last 10 minutes, no pickup." I smirked. Vortex is rattled, probably trying to sound the alarm. He motioned toward the briefcase. "Do you have everything?" I patted the laptop. Every damning piece of it, plus emergency server access if they try to shut us out. He nodded. And for a moment, pride flickered so vividly in his eyes, I almost forgot the stakes. Olivia confirmed all 7 board members are here, Ryan too, and his assistant. I raised a brow. I prefer embedded operative, but sure, let's go with assistant. Despite the weight of what we were about to do, 20 years of blood, sweat, and betrayal, I laughed. My dad, the warhorse of Silicon Ridge, still approached every battle the same way. Identify, confront, eliminate. "You ready?" I asked, offering my arm. He rose, straightening the lapels of his navy suit, the one he reserved for courtrooms and capital raises. "I've been ready since the day they tried to shove you out of that investor meeting." I remembered it too clearly. I was 21, fresh out of MIT, patent applications still warm from the printer. And yet, the investor, old, jaded, looked past me like I was invisible, directed every technical question to Dad, assuming the man in the room must be the one with the answers. Dad hadn't missed a beat. He stood, looked that investor dead in the eye, and said, "She's the genius behind this entire operation. Do you want real answers? You talk to her." And that's exactly what they were about to do. We walked out of that meeting without the deal, but 7 days later, we landed a partner who recognized my worth without hesitation. That same relentless belief in me was what had pulled us through every crisis Orion Dynamics had ever faced, and it would carry us through this one too. We stepped into the hallway side by side, father and daughter, founder and rightful successor, moving in perfect sync toward the boardroom where everything would be decided. Behind us, I caught the sound of Nick's voice rising in panic on a phone call. "Jason, she knows. Yeah, everything. I don't know how. No, the vote hasn't happened yet. I'll try to stall." The elevator doors closed on his frantic voice, sealing us into silence as we ascended to the executive floor. "Sloppy," Dad muttered beside me, calmly adjusting the folder in his hands. Always was his weakness. Acts before he thinks. I gripped my own files tighter, nerves sharpening into steel. The elevator dinged open. Olivia stood waiting, her face calm as ever, tablet in hand, the eye of the coming storm. "Good morning, Miss Drake, Mr. Drake." Not a trace of the chaos brewing showed in her tone. "The board is assembled. Mr. Blake asked if there was a delay." "There isn't," I replied. "We're exactly on time. For my meeting." "Very good." She fell into step beside us. "Coffee service is arranged. The display is prepped and ready." "Thank you, Olivia." We paused at the boardroom doors. Through the frosted glass, I saw the silhouettes. 8 men and women gathered around the grand Italian table imported during Orion's 10th anniversary celebration. The same table where Nick once pitched an expansion that almost destroyed us. The table where I'd unveiled the innovation plan that saved us. And, today, the table where I would take back what was mine. Dad gives my hand a quick, unseen squeeze. "Show them who you are, Maddie." I took one last breath, straightened my shoulders, and pushed open the doors. Good morning, I said, my voice cutting cleanly through the stunned silence. Let's talk about the future of Orion Dynamics. Not a single person at that table realized their grand little coup had already fallen apart. Every smug expression, every whispered scheme, it all unraveled the moment I stepped into that room. All except the one man standing silently behind me, the one who taught me that a real defense wasn't just playing smart, it was making your move before the enemy even knew a game was being played. It was Chairman David Blake who recovered first, half rising from his chair, trying to mask his unease. Madeline Drake, we weren't expecting you. Obviously, I replied coolly as I made my way to the seat of power, the one usually reserved for the CEO, or, in their absence, the chair himself. But I didn't sit there. No, I placed my materials at the center of the table instead, where all eyes would have no choice but to meet mine. I believe we have a few pressing matters to go over this morning, I said, calmly locking eyes with each board member in turn. Starting with the hostile takeover attempt no one thought to inform the company's majority shareholder about. And just like that, the real meeting began. The boardroom had always reminded me of a stage. The gleaming marble table, our theater, the ergonomic chairs for our actors, and the floor-to-ceiling windows casting just the right dramatic shadows. And today's performance? Pure Shakespeare. Betrayal, ambition, and the satisfying hint of an impending collapse. I watched as Blake's face cycled through a kaleidoscope of reactions. Shock, denial, forced charm, and then finally, genuine fear. Majority shareholder? He echoed, glancing nervously between me and my father. I'm not sure what you're referring to, Maddie. The ownership structure is well documented in the bylaws. Yes, I replied, lifting the bright blue briefcase onto the table with deliberate care. Specifically in Section 8, paragraph E12, the clause detailing majority share transfer upon execution of the founder's succession plan. I slid the document forward across the polished wood. The room fell completely silent. So silent, it might have cracked under the weight of what was coming next. Sliding the document across the polished table toward David Blake, the room fell into a tense, loaded silence, the kind that lingers just before an avalanche crashes down. This succession plan, I said, voice even and resolute, was filed with our legal team at Davis & Merrick a month ago. It transfers 51% ownership of Drake Systems to the Madeline Drake Family Trust, of which I am the sole trustee and beneficiary. Right on cue, the boardroom doors flew open with a bang. Connor, hair rumpled, tie askew, confidence unraveling, stormed in, Vanessa 2 steps behind him in 4-inch heels and a silk blouse that suddenly looked far less commanding. Sorry for the delay, Connor announced, trying to seize back the room, as though his voice alone could override reality. There was, a scheduling mix-up. He stopped dead, the moment he registered the scene. Me, seated confidently at the table, my father, standing beside me like a general ready for war, and every board member, already flipping through a packet of legal documents, halfway through detonating his master plan. Patricia Chen, the board's longest-serving member and sharpest mind, glanced up from her copy. Her eyes, cold and exact behind a pair of Prada frames, zeroed in on my father. Gerald, is this verified? My father gave a single nod. Filed with Davis & Merrick 30 days ago. Registered with the SEC last Friday. That's impossible, Connor snapped, striding toward the table like his presence could erase legal filings. The shareholder reports from Q1 reflect an outdated distribution, I cut in smoothly, not missing a beat. which is why this morning's agenda, I looked up, has been updated. I gave a brief nod to Olivia, who silently began handing out the folders we'd prepared. Inside, copies of the succession paperwork, fresh shareholder certificates, and, most damning of all, the printed email exchanges between Connor and Vortex Industries. Connor lunged for Blake's copy, but the chairman pulled it back, already scanning it with shaking hands and a deepening frown. "What is this?" Blake barked, eyes darting between Connor and me. "Evidence," I answered coolly, "of corporate espionage, breach of fiduciary duty, collusion with a direct competitor. Take your pick." Vanessa hadn't moved from the doorway. Her polished exterior cracked at last, jaw clenched, hands twitching slightly at her sides. "This is a misunderstanding," she said, voice brittle, fragile. "Oh?" I tilted my head. "Is it a misunderstanding that you've been drawing a salary from Vortex for 8 years while also accepting an executive role at their primary rival?" The silence that followed was absolute and lethal. I arched an eyebrow, voice cold as steel. "Or is it a misunderstanding that you've been funneling trade secrets to Vortex through my husband for over half a year?" Chaos detonated. Voices rose in confusion and outrage, chairs scraped back, papers rustled like dry leaves in a storm. The boardroom turned into a pressure cooker, decades of decorum cracking under the weight of betrayal. And through it all, my father stood at my side, calm, immovable, like bedrock, the eye of the hurricane. Connor's palm slammed against the table. "This is insane! Harper is making wild accusations because she's upset about being replaced." He shouted louder, clinging to his narrative like a drowning man grasping at driftwood. "The board already voted on the restructuring." "Without full disclosure," Patricia Chen cut in, brandishing the emails like a blade. "If these are real—" "They are," my father said, voice quiet, but it sliced clean through the chaos. "Our cybersecurity team verified their authenticity at 7:42 this morning." The room shifted, posture stiffened, expressions changed. "This changes everything," said James Rodriguez, the youngest board member, who'd mostly observed until now. "We can't proceed with any decisions, not until these allegations are properly investigated." Connor's polished composure cracked. A bead of sweat rolled down his temple. "You don't understand. The Vortex timeline is tight. Delaying this costs us millions." "We'll lose far more than money if this goes through," I replied, rising to my feet. "Did you conveniently omit that the terms hand Vortex full ownership of our patents and algorithms? That they're paying 60 cents on the dollar compared to market value?" Gasps. Papers shuffled violently now as board members flipped through the highlighted acquisition terms we'd slipped into their folders. Blake's face had gone pale. He gripped the pages like they were about to explode. "I was told this was a strategic partnership," he murmured, stunned. "Not a clearance sale?" "You were misled," I said bluntly. "All of you were, by a man who was supposed to protect this company, not auction it off behind closed doors." Connor went still, frozen. Then, as if realizing the tide had fully turned against him, he played his final card, the one that always worked when truth failed. Deflection. "This is personal," he sneered, pointing at me. "Harper can't separate her emotions from business. She's on a revenge crusade because I moved on, because I found someone better." Behind him, Vanessa's face tightened, eyes wide, lips parting slightly. Even she hadn't expected to be reduced to a footnote. Someone else. But this wasn't about her. And Connor? He had just reminded the room exactly what kind of man he was. When the pressure mounted, I said, leveling my gaze at Connor, is that why you held the restructuring vote behind my back? Because of my supposed emotional reactions? Or because you knew I'd call the Vortex acquisition exactly what it is, a corporate ambush? The room held its breath. Patricia Chen, sharp as ever, removed her glasses and skewered Connor with a look that could dismantle a startup in under 5 seconds. You told the board Harper had recused herself from the vote, she said icily, that she was handling personal matters. I never said any such thing, I replied, voice steady. In fact, I didn't even know there was a vote until last night, when my husband introduced me to my successor at our anniversary dinner. A collective ripple of shock passed through the room. Even James Rodriguez, normally Connor's echo in meetings, and his regular golf partner, shifted in his seat, visibly recoiling at the cruelty of it. That's not how it happened, Connor stammered, voice cracking, as he glanced around the room for allies who no longer existed. The dinner, it was just meant to be a courtesy, to make the transition smoother. By seating me in the back corner, I cut in, my tone like ice, while you toasted your new chapter with her. Don't insult everyone here with a lie that flimsy. The parallels to my father's betrayal, decades earlier, slammed into me like a wave. The same strategy of isolation, of calculated humiliation. Only this time, I wasn't going to cry into a plate of cold pasta. I wasn't going to disappear. This time, I was ready. The succession plan is clear, my father said, finally stepping forward, his voice calm, but with the unmistakable weight of authority. As the majority shareholder, Harper has final say over any acquisitions or executive changes. Any vote taken without her approval is invalid. Full stop. Wilson Blake cleared his throat, shifting in his seat, as if it had suddenly become too hot. Gerald, with all due respect, the board believed we were within our rights. No, my father interrupted, gaze locked. You weren't. You were deliberately misled. And just like that, the illusion shattered. I don't think so, I said, sliding a final set of documents across the gleaming table, each page a nail in Connor's professional coffin. As these meeting minutes show, the board was told I had reviewed and approved the acquisition terms. I pointed. That signature? It's a forgery, not mine. Wilson Blake leaned forward, eyes narrowing as he examined the page. Then he looked up, face pale, voice clipped. You personally told us Harper had signed this. Connor's mask cracked, his carefully cultivated confidence crumbling into a panicked mess. The deal is already in motion, he snapped. Contracts are finalized, press releases scheduled. We can't just scrap it all because Harper's feelings got bruised. My feelings? I laughed, once, sharp and cold enough to cut through the air. This isn't about me, Connor. This is about 238 people who will lose their jobs when Vortex slashes staff in their so-called efficiency phase. This is about our clients, some of whom have been with us since the garage days, being blindsided when their service terms are voided and their costs skyrocket. It's about proprietary tech we developed being buried to make way for Vortex's subpar garbage. I stood, my voice rising with conviction, commanding the room. But most of all, it's about Meridian, a company my father and I built from nothing. The same company that redefined data security in a market that told us we couldn't compete. A company you, Connor, were willing to burn to the ground for what? A bigger office at Vortex? A 7-figure bonus? A shiny new title? Connor didn't respond. He didn't have to. His silence screamed guilt louder than any words could. Turning to the board, I held my head high. As majority shareholder, I am calling for an immediate vote of no confidence in Connor Maddox as Chief Operating Officer of Halcyon Systems. Patricia Chen didn't hesitate. Seconded. All in favor? My father asked, his voice steadier than it had sounded in months. And one by one, hands went up. 7 hands shot up without hesitation. Only Caleb Morgan, Connor's usual ally, wavered. But after a tense pause, even he lifted his hand, slowly, like a man accepting an inevitable fate. The vote is unanimous, I announced, my voice echoing off the glass and steel. Connor Maddox is officially removed from his role as Chief Operating Officer, effective immediately. Connor exploded from his seat, fury distorting his once slick demeanor. "You can't do this to me," he shouted, pointing at me like a man betrayed. "I built this damn company. I brought in the investors, the clients." "Security," my father said calmly into the intercom. 2 officers arrived almost instantly. I'd hired them myself, back when we expanded Halcyon's campus. Both veterans, both loyal. "Please escort Mr. Maddox off the premises," I said, turning toward them. "His access credentials have already been revoked." Connor backed up a step, his eyes wild. "This isn't over, Harper. You think you've won? The market will tear you apart without me. You're nothing without me." I met his glare, calm, unshaken. "I survived your betrayal, Connor. I think I'll survive Wall Street." As they walked him out, I finally turned to the woman who had remained motionless throughout the carnage, Genevieve. "You can find your own way out," I said smoothly. "I'm sure your contacts at Vortex are dying for an update." Something flickered in her eyes. Not guilt, not quite, but maybe recognition, a reluctant, quiet acknowledgement of the woman who had just dismantled their entire plan in a single morning. "For what it's worth," she began, hesitating, "it wasn't personal." I raised an eyebrow. "Selling out my company? Sleeping with my husband?" I tilted my head. "Tell me, Jen, which part wasn't personal?" She had no answer. When they were gone, the silence in the room was deafening. The board members exchanged glances, each face showing shades of shock, shame, and something else. Uncertainty, perhaps, or awe. Wilson Blake was the first to speak, his voice low. "Harper, I owe you a sincere apology. If I'd had even the faintest clue—" "You should have known," my father cut in gently, but with steel behind his words. "You've been part of Halcyon for 15 years, Wilson. You've seen my daughter grow this company from a basement startup to an industry leader. You were there at her college graduation, at her wedding, and still, you believed she'd just step aside, quietly, without a fight?" Wilson looked down, visibly ashamed. "We were told what we wanted to hear," I said, my voice steady but sharp. "And no one questioned it, because it was easier to believe Connor, a man, than verify with me." No one argued. No one could. "So, where do we go from here?" Patricia Chen asked, ever the pragmatist. I began organizing the papers, snapping the blue leather briefcase shut with a sound that felt like the final nail in Connor's coffin. "First," I said, "we contact legal. A formal statement goes out by noon, voiding any so-called agreements made with Vortex. Then," I continued, "we schedule an all-hands meeting. The team deserves the truth. No one's getting laid off, no restructuring, no acquisition. We are not for sale." "And the leadership situation?" James Rodriguez asked, glancing uneasily toward the now empty seat where Connor had fumed just minutes ago. The succession protocol is already in effect, my father replied smoothly. Harper Maddox will assume the role of Chief Executive Officer, effective immediately. I'll remain on as chairman, advisory only. A few heads nodded, then more, eventually all of them. Not that they had a choice. With 51% ownership under the Maddox Family Trust, I could have dissolved the entire board if I wanted to. But Halcyon wasn't built on tyranny. It had always been about vision, innovation, partnership. And that wouldn't change under my leadership. If there's nothing further, I said, rising to my full height, this meeting is officially adjourned. Olivia will coordinate one-on-one sessions with each of you to handle follow-ups this afternoon. They exited the room in silence, humbled, shaken, complicit. Only Patricia paused at the threshold. She turned, her eyes softer than I'd ever seen them. Your mother would be proud, she said. Nothing else, just that. Then she walked away. Alone now with my father, the boardroom finally quiet, I felt my shoulders fall. I let go of the breath I'd been holding for what felt like years. You did it, Harper, he said, his voice low with pride. I smiled, covering his hand with mine. Correction, Dad. We did this. Together. A sharp knock interrupted our moment. Olivia appeared in the doorway, her face unusually tense. Miss Maddox, I'm sorry to intrude, but there's something you need to see. She strode over to the conference room's digital display and synced her tablet. The screen came to life, flashing a bold headline across the Halcyon internal newsfeed. Halcyon Tech in crisis. Coup attempt fails as founder's daughter takes control. Underneath, a photo of Connor being escorted out of the building, red-faced, jaw clenched in fury. Next to it, a stock image of me from last year's Boston Tech for Good Gala. Elegant dress, tight-lipped expression, eyes steely. It's already hit every major tech outlet, Olivia informed me, scrolling through mentions. Looks like Connor went to the press the moment he left the building. I scanned the article. The tone? Surgical. Words like hostile, emotional, unprecedented leapt off the page. The message was crystal clear. A bitter wife hijacking her father's company to punish her cheating husband. Not a single mention of Vortex. Not a word about forged signatures or illegal backdoor deals. Dad read over my shoulder. I heard the quiet hitch in his breathing. They're spinning it, he said, disgusted. They always do, I replied, rolling my shoulders back. But they forgot one key thing. He looked at me, eyes questioning. What's that? I turned to Olivia. My decision was already made. Schedule a press conference, 1 hour, in the main lobby. I want every employee there. And call Davis and Hawthorne. I want the full legal team present, front and center. Olivia nodded, fingers already flying across her screen. What should I tell the media the topic is? She asked. I gave her the first real smile I'd had since this nightmare began. Tell them the new CEO of Halcyon Systems is making her first official statement. As Olivia rushed out, Dad raised an eyebrow. Going on the offensive already? They wanted a scandal, I said with a shrug. I'll give them one. But it's not going to be about a woman scorned. It's going to be about corporate espionage, fraud, and the woman who shut it all down before it was too late. Dad laughed then, a real laugh. The kind I hadn't heard in months, warm, full, and free of fear. That's my girl. I gathered my notes, head already spinning with the narrative I was about to reclaim. For too long, people like Connor, the board, the media, they all decided who I was, what I was worth, what I was capable of. That ended today. You ready for this? Dad asked as we stepped into the hallway, heading toward the lobby. Because once you walk into that room, everything changes. Your career, your marriage, your entire future, Dad said as we reached the elevator. I paused. turning one last time to glance back at the boardroom, the place where I hadn't just reclaimed control of a company, but reclaimed myself. "No," I said quietly, eyes fixed on the doorway. Everything changed the moment Connor said, "Meet your replacement." He just didn't realize he was the one being replaced. We walked forward together, father and daughter, founder and heir, toward the lobby, where Halcyon's next chapter, my chapter, was about to begin. Behind us, the boardroom screen still glowed with Connor's furious face frozen mid-rant on the newsfeed, already fading into irrelevance, already yesterday's story. Mine, however, stared back at the world, calm, poised, resolute, the future of Halcyon Systems. I read somewhere once that the most pivotal moments in life rarely arrive with fireworks or dramatic music. No, they often come wrapped in silence, disguised as something forgettable, a routine dinner, a casual sentence. "Meet Vanessa, your replacement." 5 words, 5 syllables that detonated everything I thought I knew, that forced me to face the truth I'd buried for years. The press conference lasted exactly 22 minutes. I stood at the podium in Halcyon's sunlit glass lobby, modern steel surrounding me like armor. My father stood just behind my right shoulder, a quiet declaration of loyalty. Reporters jostled, employees watched wide-eyed from the balconies above, whispers flying behind uncertain hands. And I stood still, spoke calmly, laid out the facts like blueprints. No emotion, no drama, just truth. The unauthorized acquisition attempt, the internal sabotage, the board's unanimous vote to remove Connor Whitman, my elevation to CEO per the original succession plan. Not once did I mention our marriage. Not once did I label it betrayal. I didn't need to. Halcyon Systems remains committed to innovation, integrity, and independence, I concluded. Then I stepped away from the podium, leaving behind a sea of questions and flashing lights. I didn't flinch because I wasn't playing into his narrative, that fragile, sexist tale of a bitter wife seeking revenge. 3 weeks later, I sit in my new office, once my father's, watching the sun bleed behind the Blue Ridge Mountains. The view never gets old, neither does the knowledge that Halcyon is still ours. The fallout came just as expected. Connor tried everything. First came the threats, then the desperate apologies, then the legal posturing. Our lawyers handled it all, efficiently, mercilessly. I never answered him, not once. Vanessa? She faded back into the shadows of Vortex Corp., her smiling face absent from their next quarterly report. Their stock nosedived 12%, right after our press conference exposed the ambush. Vortex's CEO released a carefully crafted statement, denying knowledge, blaming individual actors. No one bought it. The board, meanwhile, suddenly became my biggest fans, supportive, vocal, eager even. Guilt is a powerful motivator. Wilson Blake handed in his resignation. I declined. "We all make mistakes," I told him quietly. "What matters is whether we learn anything from them." As for my father, his recovery was nothing short of miraculous. Once the threat to our legacy was gone, the weight lifted from his chest, literally. His cardiologists were stunned. I wasn't, because some illnesses aren't cured by medicine. Only justice can heal certain wounds. A soft knock pulled me from my thoughts. Olivia, still the sharpest executive assistant I've ever known, stepped in, holding a slim manila folder. "The final divorce papers," she said, laying them gently on my desk. Mr. Whitman's attorney confirmed he signed everything. "Thank you, Olivia." I didn't reach for them right away. That folder was more than ink and legalese. It was the burial certificate of a 7-year illusion, of something I once believed was a partnership, only to discover it had been a performance, a transaction, a lie. Olivia cleared her throat. Also, the Newton acquisition team needs your approval on the revised integration terms. I smiled. That deal, the very one Connor had clung to like a lifeline, was moving forward, under my leadership. Reimagined. Not a scorched earth acquisition, but a merger built to preserve jobs, to share tech, to honor innovation. The opposite of his vision. I'll review it this evening, I told her. She nodded, then paused. One more thing, a delivery came for you. A moment later, she returned, carrying a small brown paper package. No card, no sender info, just my name. In handwriting I recognized instantly. Connor's. After she left, I just stared at it for a long time. Every instinct told me to toss it in the trash, unopened. But that same insatiable curiosity, the thing that led me to dismantle and rebuild my first desktop PC at 9 years old, refused to let it go. Inside, a velvet jewelry box. And within that, my mother's sapphire earrings, the ones I left behind in the penthouse when I walked out 3 weeks ago. The only personal item I'd truly regretted leaving. No note, no explanation. Just the earrings, returned. Maybe it was his version of an apology. Maybe it was a calculated move, a reminder that he still had access to fragments of my past. Or maybe it was just guilt, that most useless of emotions. Whatever his intent, it didn't matter, because I wasn't that woman anymore. I tucked the sapphire earrings into my desk drawer, the last artifact of a chapter finally closed. The past belongs exactly where it is, behind me. My phone buzzes. Dad, dinner at 7. Olivia booked Castellanos. I smile. Our Thursday night tradition lives on, even after betrayal, boardroom battles, and divorce filings. Some things, like family, remain unshakable. Me wouldn't miss it. I gather my coat and tablet, heading out of the office. The executive floor has changed since I took over, physically and culturally. The glass walls I once lobbied for still catch the light just right, but the corner offices? Gone, dismantled. Hierarchy has been replaced with clarity. Titles matter less than voices. Transparency isn't just architectural anymore. It's embedded in every process we run, from strategy meetings to internal communications. I pass teams on my way to the elevator. Some nod, some smile, a few greet me by name. Not with the stiff, fearful posture they used to reserve for Connor, with something else entirely: respect. In the elevator, I catch a glimpse of myself in the mirrored doors. Same gray eyes, same sharp cheekbones, but I look different, stronger, sharper, as if the weight that once bent my shoulders has become the steel in my spine. This is what it looks like to take back your life. This is what it looks like when you refuse to be erased.